We are back. The Matchbook Weekend Football Podcast returns. I'm your host, Ali Maxwell. Delighted to be back with Team Matchbook for the new season and navigating us through the thoughts, the bets and the insight provided by a whole host of shrewd and knowledgeable guests. And this season, we are coming to you on podcast platforms as before, but also on video as well. So head to the Matchbook YouTube channel to see our handsome faces. Also, you've got the options of Twitter, Facebook and Instagram as well. Just search for Team Matchbook. So you really are spoiled for choice. This week, it's simple. This is the Premier League preview panel doing exactly what it sounds like. The best bets, the best value, underrated and overrated teams and much more. And I'm joined by a couple of returners and a new guest as well. We welcome back Mark O'Haire. Mark, the absolute Matchbook guru. We work you very, very hard and we're delighted that you're back for the new season. How was your summer?
Yeah, it was very good, Ali. Thanks. Delighted to be back. Obviously, great that football is back on the agenda. It's been a long summer without a major tournament. Dipped my toes into the internationals, but there's nothing quite like the return of club football.
Correct answer. Nigel Seeley from Betting Pro and Betting Emporium. You take any time out from the game this summer, Nigel? I know you're into your tennis as well. Was that a busy period for you?
Wimbledon is always a very busy period, and I was on the Matchbook podcast throughout Wimbledon fortnight, and hopefully this season on the football I'll do a lot better, because that was one of the worst tournaments I've ever had in 15 years of doing this kind of stuff. So hopefully we're looking better. Put a lot of research in this year. Really looking forward to the Premier League. Looking forward to all the football kicking off in all the leagues as well. But the Premier League is the big one, and we've got some big bets for us on this podcast as well to get stuck into, and some good advice.
Spot on. And the new special guest, football expert Matt Scott from TalkSports. Matt, we're thrilled that you're joining us. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the new season.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Looking forward always to new Premier League season, especially when every year my team always wins the league at this stage.
Don't tell me you are another gooner on the
Very well, yeah. A is for Arsenal, and right now there's 19 teams behind us.
Right, okay. We'll see what the others think about that once we get cracking. Before we do start, just a word to the listeners, to the viewers, that Matchbook are offering a £10 risk-free bet if you sign up on site today. If you head to offer.matchbook.com, you can see the full terms and conditions for that offer. And I must stress, this is for over 18s only. We would ask that you be gamble aware. But now we're going to get into our first topic, and it's very, very simple. We're going straight to Matt so we can get your immediate credentials. Matt, your best Premier League bet of last season. Talk us through it.
Unfortunately, it didn't come in. But what I would say is, this was one based on head over heart, believe it or not. But I had Arsenal to finish third, and there were two freak injuries that really did upset Arsenal's season last year. They had two ACLs to two of their first team defenders. And an ACL, you would expect each club to have an ACL injury once every 2 years. That's the statistics from UEFA's medical department. But last season, Arsenal had that happen to them twice in 1 year in the same part of the pitch. And it's very, very difficult to absorb that kind of an injury crisis, particularly at a time when you're already missing your captain through injury, and there were several other injury problems at the back for Arsenal. The groin strain from Mavropanos throughout. I think Arsenal, if they hadn't had that defensive injury crisis, then the few points that there were between themselves and third place, that would have paid out on my 4-1 bet. So it's all ifs, buts and maybes, I know, but I thought that was a pretty shrewd bet because the market thought there was a 25% chance of it, and I think there was a closer to a 70-80% chance of it had that horrific injury sequence not hit them.
You'll fit in very well with value losers here, Matt, that's for sure. Let's go to Nigel Seeley. What was the most memorable punt of yours from last season?
I had three pre-season bets. Two of them won and one of them lost. I bet Burnley to get relegated, which I thought with the fact that they were playing in the Europa League was going to be a big hang-up. And it looked really good at the early part of the season. They traded a lot shorter. So obviously on the exchange, if you wanted to get out of that position, you could have got out of that position with a bit of profit. But obviously they turned it around. Sean Dyche got them playing on the Burnley way towards the end of the season. They grinded out points. I backed Manchester City to win the league at 8-11. We had a little bit of a wobble, a bit of concern at some stage when Liverpool on the coattails, but the class shone through. And had a right going on the Arsenal colours again there, but I had a right bit of a sweat up by Aubameyang to be the top goal scorer, which
wow.
got shared out. We got shared out on a place on the final day of the season. And so really they were my only three major bets. Obviously, week in, week out on the Matchbook betting podcast, we've given winners on week in, week out, and Mark's the man who was in form all of last season. I just got to come in and play the bit part. But they were my three anti-post bets, and we got one winner, one dead heat, and a value loser. So another value loser, really.
There you go, Mark. I'm hoping you're going to join the dots for us and give us one more. I mean, you're known for finding value across the whole continent, across the whole footballing world. But in terms of the Premier League, what stood out for you last season?
Yeah, it wasn't fantastic for me Premier League-wise. I had quite a few bets across a range of different markets, but the two that stand out, like Nigel had Aubameyang top goal scorer. Wasn't expecting him to have quite such a good season in his first full campaign in the English League, but very pleased with that one. My biggest bet was actually Huddersfield to be relegated. The price wasn't exactly fantastic, 5-4, but they started at 8-11 the first season in the Premier League, so I wasn't convinced that that the price was warranted to be boosted that much after a pretty shaky first season, and I'm pretty pleased that the second season syndrome hit them quite hard, and I was kind of waiting for that payout from Christmas onwards, really.
Right, we're going to look forward now, and the first question is, well, it's about teams that underperformed last year that might turn it around this season, and sides which overperformed last season and might regress to the mean a bit this year. Mark, starting with you, is there anyone you flagged up in that sense?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think there's great potential behind Southampton this season. Ralph Hasenhüttl in charge. They were pretty rank under Mark Hughes. Easy to forget that they were, lounging around the bottom of the Premier League towards December time. 9 points, 1 win from 15. Hasenhüttl came in, immediate impact. 8 of their 9 wins came under his tutorship during a 23-game spell where they picked up 30 points. And that's despite not having a full pre-season to get his ideas across. He's a very modern German manager, high pressing, full throttle football. They've also made a couple of interesting additions as well. Shea Adams from the Championship and Musa Genepo as well. Adds real pace and a sort of directness to their attack. Goal scoring was their issue last season, but I'm not convinced that they've solved that yet. But I certainly think they've got the tools and the ability to at least trouble the top half and kind of push much further forward. In terms of regression, more regression to the mean. I'm not going to say Wolves, but I think Wolves are actually going to underperform their figures last season. But I'd be surprised if they finished as high as 7th with potential Europa League commitments. Very small squad too. I know they're adding to it, but injuries didn't bite last season. And if they do get a couple of injuries, the extra fatigue of travel and playing extra matches in Europe could easily play a part. Newcastle, another one of the obvious ones who could drop back. Rafa Benitez guided them to 13th. The reality, that squad is actually a bottom 6 squad, so very difficult job for Steve Bruce to step into. And I'm also actually getting almost increasingly anxious, I guess, for Crystal Palace, because no team's more reliant on one player. Wilfried Zaha, his future remains up in the air. Everton coming in now with bids as well. Wan-Bissaka's left. Batshuayi's no longer around. Very reliant on Zaha last season, not just for goals and assists, but also for winning penalties. 10 of their 51 goals came from the spot kicks. The home form was very poor. Benteke hasn't been fit for a long time. And I just think they lack game changers, really. Hodgson's a very safe pair of hands, but there's murmurings of discontent. And I think 11-2 for relegation is slightly overpriced.
What about you, Nigel Seeley? Anything to add on this front? I mean, there's barely any teams left.
Well, they're very similar to Mark. I've got 3 that I wanted to keep an eye on, and 3 that I wanted to pose. And the 3 I wanted to keep an eye on are Leicester, West Ham, and Southampton. I think they're all going to improve on last season. I think West Ham are going to really do well this season. I think the signing of Haller up front is going to be one of the great, best signings in the Premier League. I think they needed a striker. They had a great midfield. They had goals in them. Declan Rice gets better and better every time you see him play. Defensively, they've got a good goalkeeper, played the year last year, and I think that everything's set up for West Ham to have a good season. Leicester, we all know about Leicester. The only trouble with Leicester now is I think that everyone's got the wink for them. Everyone realises, and I think they're probably going to be no value at the price they're going to start off. I think everyone thinks they're going to be a good side, but I think they're going to improve definitely on last season. And Southampton, and the 3 I want to oppose, exactly the same. Crystal Palace and Newcastle will come on later with some of the things I want to get them with. And the other team I think that will really, really go backwards is Chelsea. I think Frank Lampard going in, I mean, it's probably the most uninspiring squad that Chelsea's had since Abramovich has been in the charge. You've got the transfer embargo. You've got a lot of young talent to work on, but you can get the best out of them in the Championship derby. But playing in the Premier League, Tammy Abraham leading the line for them. Is he up to playing in Champions League football? Is he up to playing the top echelons of the Premier League? I doubt very much if he is. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Chelsea fall out of the top four, maybe potentially not even make the top six, because I think the gap's coming up between the others and Chelsea. And I think if you're looking for a team to oppose at the prices and a team that are going to go backwards, I think Chelsea would be definitely fall into that category.
That's really interesting. Matt, is there anyone that you have in mind here?
Well, I personally, I'm not as convinced about the fragilities of Newcastle as other people are, and I'm sure we can develop on that. But one name that I'd like to add that nobody else has mentioned is Watford. They obviously got to an FA Cup final last season. I think the fact they were hammered 6-0 in that FA Cup final is probably closer to the reality of Watford than what we've seen. They dropped out of the top 6 or 7 into 11th towards the end of the season. Their form fell away. I think VAR could cost them. You've got that big man up front, Troy Deeney, and the introduction of VAR may be a bit of a curveball for Watford. So already from the expected points last season, they were 4 points over where they should have been, even in the regard of without those factors. They haven't really strengthened this summer. I like the look of Southampton in terms of the underperformance from last year. The expected points, they were 6 points below where they should have been, and 3 places. Bournemouth as well. They've recruited well, fullback. They've recruited well in the centre of midfield. I think that's another team very, very well coached by Eddie Howe. Another team that I think can certainly punch above where they finished up last year, which was 14th. I think we can see them in the top half. I know it's going to be a very crowded top half if that does happen. But, we're going to go on to the value about relegation and whatnot later. So I'm not going to go into that just now. But I think that Watford is one to watch out for as a potential one to oppose.
Nigel, Watford were a big one for you last season, weren't they, with your FA Cup bet? And obviously getting to the final, it was about as good as it gets there. You followed them closely last season. Any thoughts on them heading into this season?
Well, it's funny because that was going to be my headline. When you said that it was my bet of the season, I was going to say Watford each way for the FA Cup, but I realised we were talking about the Premier League, so I couldn't gloat on that. I think Watford were a side, though, last season that they beat everyone in and around them. Mark's the king of the stats. He'll tell me the records. But from anyone in the bottom half of the division, Watford beat. It was when they played the top 6 or top 7, they got absolutely hammered. So if they start dropping points about the teams in or around them, then they're going to fall into that relegation battle. I think they've got a good manager, and for the first time for a long time, Watford are quite settled. They chop and change managers all the time. They've got a good manager now. Troy Deeney is crucial to the side. I mean, he's absolutely crucial to the team. We talk about Sahar. I think he's crucial to Palace. Same can be said for Troy Deeney. But I think they're a team that have really punched above their weight really for the last 2 or 3 seasons. But the trouble is they're not a fashionable side, so the bookies and the general betting public don't really overrate them. They're always underrated in the price that they appear each week on the betting list. It's teams like the Newcastle of this world who have more of a following that probably are going to be overrated for betting week in and week out. Nobody expects much from Watford, and they always seem to do a little bit better than what we expect. But I do take your point. I think they will struggle, and I think there's a lot of bad teams in the Premier League that I think they'll be safe.
And in terms of the current underdogs that you might pick up, or rather pick out, I guess there could be a bit of overlap with the last question here. So feel free to sort of just refer back to what you've already told me. But any teams that we think could perform really well as big underdogs, starting with you, Matt?
I think Norwich have got a real chance of doing things that people didn't expect. Let's not forget, to talk about the not being a big following. At the end of the season before last, they were one of the favourites for relegation out of the Championship. They managed to introduce some really, really good young players. The manager's obviously a year further into it, and he's another one who is really, for me, one of the top performing in the 92. I think there's a chance that some of those young boys can really tear up the Premier League. I think they've been playing football in a Premier League way, not a Championship way, and I think that's been, I think they'll be well suited to the top division as a result. The manager's very good. There's a football philosophy. The whole club is set up to make things with as least disruption as possible. And I think that Norwich could surprise one or two people, because they will certainly be wondering where they are. The markets are saying they're one of the favourites for relegation. And personally, I'm of the view that they can upset quite a few teams. Not in the way that Wolves did coming up last season, but they were worthy champions. And I think they've got a chance. And also, I mean, we'll go into the newly promoted sides later on, I'm sure. But I do think that there's some value potentially in Norwich from week to week.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of the topics that we've got lined up, you know, there will be a bit of overlap. Let's go to Mark O'Haire, just in terms of big value underdogs. It might be that this is one of the newly promoted teams, in which case, you know, do tell us all about it. Where are you looking in this sense?
Well, if you look at last season, Wolves are the obvious ones, really. Just 4 defeats against the Big Six. Only lost 5 times in all against the top half teams. They tended to struggle against the lesser lights. But Palace were actually the best performing underdog in the Premier League last year. Didn't lose by more than 2 goals against anyone. Got great results against some of the big teams. If you actually backed them with a £10 stake in every game last season, you'd have made 233 quid, which was the best in the Premier League. But there's obvious concerns, as we've touched upon earlier. So for me, again, a sort of nod towards Southampton, a nod towards the 3 promoted teams as well, which we'll touch on shortly. But I actually also disagree with the lads about Watford. I think they've got great potential to at least trouble the top half this year. They've kept their side together. I'm absolutely in love with Javi Gracia as a head coach. I think he sets his teams up superbly. Those 2 marauders in midfield, Decore, and also Delafeo, since he switched towards the sort of central position as well, just adds a bit more craft and guile to their team. Start of the season, he was kind of flittering in and out of the team from a wide area, but really came into his own towards the end. And you know, if you sort of take out the last 4 or 5 games when they were concentrating on the FA Cup, they would have finished in the top half. So I fancy them to go well as a bit of an underdog.
That's interesting, because I would have put Watford down as maybe being the most unpredictable team in the Premier League last season. So for us to not be able to truly agree on them at this stage feels actually very apt, I must admit. Nigel, what about you in terms of underdogs? Someone that you've mentioned already, or have you got something fresh for us?
Yeah, I think Southampton are the side that I highlighted as the team that I think we're going to perform best as the underdog. I mean, I've worked for 15 years as an odds compiler, doing soccer odds and doing spread betting prices for IG Index many years ago. And there's always teams that you have a rebase on after 6 or 7 games. That you just change the pre-season rating of them, and it tends to be the promoted sides. I remember Ipswich when they got promoted up from they always went all the way up to 2nd or 3rd in the Premier League title. They with Marcus Stewart. They had a rebase after 6 or 7 games. That was a huge rebase, because we had them in for hardly any points on what their rating was at the start of the season. And I think we pretty much know the deviation between the teams that have been in the Premier League this season isn't going to change much. You know, realistically, they could probably move and get themselves sort of 5 or 6 points better. You're not going to get many teams outperforming themselves hugely, but the promoted sides are unknown quantities. We don't really know how they're going to equip. We don't know how they're going to. They could finish bottom like Huddersfield did last season, or adrift, or they could push up like Wolves. We don't really know what we're going to happen. So I think what you do is you get the value on these people early doors, because I believe that teams like Aston Villa, Norwich, first few games of the season at home, the crowd will be absolutely full of optimism. It'll be packed houses, and you might get them at big prices performing shock results in the first 6 or 7 games of the season. Once it gets past the new year and the injuries come in, and their squad is a lot thinner than what it was in the other teams, then they're going to get found out whether they're big enough. But I think Aston Villa, especially in the first 2 months of the season, could I haven't looked at all their fixtures at the moment, but if they've got a decent home side, a team at home, or Norwich at home, they can pull off a shock at a big price. And the reason why Crystal Palace was so successful last season is because they beat Man City away from home. That was where you got your money, really, on that one game. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a Villa or a Norwich to overturning a big team at the weekend. I think Norwich are getting a 2.5 goal start against Liverpool the first day of the season. I think that's too high. Opening games of the season and games in the first week, second weeks, they're very tight. They're very, very tight. Usually go under the goals and you know, late goals to win games. And I think early doors, Villa, Sheffield United and Norwich will be very hard to beat, especially at home.
Yeah, can I just add to that, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go.
I mean, about Liverpool, the start of the season, they're going to have a lot of absentees. They've had Firmino in the Copa America. They've had the Africa Cup of Nations for Senegal and for Egypt. Senegal getting to the final of that, Sadio Mane and Mo Salah. I'd be surprised to see all three of those front three start at the beginning of the Premier League season. I'd be astonished if they start in the Community Shield. So, if they're not well baked at the start of the season, then there's even more of an opportunity, because without them firing and scoring the goals, Liverpool don't have a huge amount anywhere else.
Yeah, I know that social media is just a terrible place to take the temperature of teams, fans and how they're feeling, but I know that there have been some Liverpool fans concerned about the way they might start the season, rather than just basking in the glow of their Champions League win, which seems peculiar to me, but maybe they're seeing something that I'm not, and Matt, as you mentioned, they will have some absentees. Nigel, I think it's a really interesting point about your approach, betting on recently promoted teams, having a look at some of the early prices where you think they might be more likely to spring a shock. I mean, the first thing that sprung to mind when you said that was Huddersfield's first game. I seem to remember in the Premier League away at Crystal Palace, I think it was, if not their first, then definitely one of their first games. And they went there and got an amazing win, and obviously didn't win many more games for about 20 months after that. So certainly worth keeping.
I think Bournemouth as well this season, they went up, or Huddersfield went to West Ham first game of the season and won 4-2 as well. So it does happen. And when you get the shock results for these teams, it happens in the first 6 or 7 games, because everyone's on the high. The club is on such a big high. And it's hard for teams to go there, because they don't really know what to expect. They've done their scouting, but they're not used to playing this level. But it's in the latter half of the season, when the injuries take the toll, when the season grinds down, and the big squads can pull in all their players, and that's when you really see the cream rise to the top. But at the beginning, you do get shock results, and I think those 3 teams will fare well, especially in the first month or so.
Yeah, Mark, you cover the Championship very closely as well. How do you rate the chances of Norwich, Sheffield United, and Villa? If you're the type of person that likes to wait and see, because there is obviously a big difference in style that has to take place quite often. Have you got a specific approach betting on recently promoted teams?
Yeah, it's always to give them the benefit of the doubt, and Nigel's absolutely spot on in his approach. Blackpool, another one, went away to Wigan on the opening day a few seasons back and absolutely smashed them up as well. But the huge sort of financial injection into the Premier League has filtered its way down to the Football League as well, especially the Championship. Huge parachute payments as well. So, there is a lot of money floating around the Championship. So these teams who do come up are much better equipped than I think the market often gives them credit for, especially Premier League fans who don't watch any EFL football. I see so many people writing off these 3 teams before a ball is kicked, and I just think it's wrong, it's disrespectful. I looked at sort of long-term trends, really, and over the last 22 seasons, promoted sides have averaged 39 points and 15th place. 45% of those are relegated. So if you look at blind historical facts, newly promoted teams are more likely to survive and suffer relegation. Now, the season before last season, all 3 promoted teams stayed up. Last season, Fulham obviously had a bit of a car crash campaign, started poorly defensively and never really recovered. But Cardiff are very, very unfortunate not to survive. So many near misses, horrendous sort of refereeing decisions in certain games. Luck wasn't on their side. They had the terrible Salah tragedy to deal with as well. Could have easily had 2 of 3 teams surviving last year. You look at the likes of Burnley, Brighton, Huddersfield, Bournemouth, even Crystal Palace, they've all stayed up after their first season. So I think it's really wrong to just pigeonhole these promoted teams as immediate strugglers. I understand why it's done, but in terms of this season, I'm relatively confident in all 3 that they can make a really good fist of it. Norwich and Sheffield United, again, looking at trends, the last 5 Championship champions have stayed up, plus in the last 20 years. Only 2 of 22 promoted sides with a goal difference of plus 36 have been relegated. Now, Norwich and Sheffield United both match those trends as well. So I think United style could certainly bloody a few noses. Again, I completely understand why they're relegation favourites, but a few people are making these sort of assessments between Villa and Fulham from last year with the money they're spending. But I think Villa are well placed. I think they've got a shrewd operator in Dean Smith behind them. Grealish and McGinn should be able to engage a really interesting signing. We see Tom Heaton now moving across as well. I think jury's definitely out on Wesley as a replacement for the striker and Tammy Abraham, but I've got enormous respect for that club, and I think they're really set up to have a good go. So I really wouldn't be surprised if all 3 stayed up, and I certainly wouldn't be backing either of them for any of them for relegation.
Matt, you seem very positive about Norwich when you spoke about them earlier. Any strong views on Sheffield United and Villa, or are you more keen just to see how they start and see how they're shaping up?
No, I mean, the narrative is exactly as Mark's identified, that Villa are going to struggle because Fulham struggled last year. They've made their 12th signing as we speak today of this summer. And I mean, that's an astonishing change around. But there's a big difference there between the way that this has been handled and the way that the transfer activity was handled at Fulham. Last year, I mean, Jokanieri, as I call the management for the bulk of last season for Fulham, was Jokanovic and Ranieri. They did not have a clue who their best team was. I mean, it was absolutely astonishing. If you go over the first 15, 20 fixtures, the back five changed from week to week under Jokanovic. So I don't see Dean Smith doing that. I think what he's done is he knows who his best players are. He knows what his first 11 is going to be. He will have a settled selection, and he's got a squad of players there that I expect him to be very happy with, and that he will be able to use properly in and out throughout the season. Let's not forget as well, he's a former Brentford manager, and you are very used to dealing with what you're given at Brentford, because the boss of Matchbook is obviously Matthew Benham is very, very used to working on the transfer market, and so things change from year to year at Brentford, and that's something that is an MO for Dean Smith. So I don't think there's going to be any issue there. I think that's a complete false comparison with Fulham. I think Sheffield United, they've got a manager who is potentially the best in the league after Poch and Pep, and possibly Unai Emery. Let's find out. But I think he is outstanding, and the fact that they are 5-2.
About Wilder.
Sorry.
What specifically about Wilder do you love so much?
Well, his track record is second to none. I mean, he's brought teams out from non-league into the Premier League. Okay, not the same team, but he's had promotions almost year in, year out, and he's done it wholly against the odds. Sheffield United's wage bill, transfer spending and wage bill, cash net transfer spending and wage bill last season, 2017-18, put them in the bottom four of the Championship. The year later, they finished in the top two. That is a manager who is punching. I mean, he's punching in a way that we haven't seen in football for a very, very long time. So I think Chris Wilder is obviously something that we have to look at, give a huge amount of respect to. And the fact that they are 5-2 on to go down with most of the market, and Villa are 6-4 to go down. So there's not really a lot of value there. But even money for Norwich to go down, and 5-2 on for Sheffield United to go down, I'd be opposing both of those.
That's interesting stuff. I think fairly positive vibes generally for the three promoted teams, which is good to hear. I wanted to ask a few more betting specific questions, and obviously there might be examples of teams that we're looking at this stage, but just asking for some punting insight really. Starting with you, Nigel, where in terms of the Premier League markets, and they are different to a lot of other leagues markets across the world because of our big six and various other things, where can we look to beat the market? Where can we look to find value pre-season?
Well, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult because the Premier League is split in three leagues, isn't it? I mean, you look at week in and week out in the Premier League, you have the top six, you have the middle eight, then the bottom six. And when there's a cigarette paper between everyone in it. So you pretty much now, anybody in week out in the Premier League is very easy to price up. Your Man City at home against anyone are going to be 7 or 8 on. Whoever they play is going to be ranging between 16 and 20 to 1, apart from the top three. And then when you pitch anybody else, home advantage will give them a slight smidgen to that favour. So you've got to look at other markets. I think the markets where there is most value is, I look at like the head-to-heads between the two sides. Mm-hmm. So and I look at I've had a lot of bets this pre-season on teams to finish in the top half. I've done it more in the lower leagues. I've done a lot in League One. I've done a lot in League Two and the Championship. But I think if you're looking at teams like Aston Villa, you're talking about teams like Norwich, have a go at them maybe to finish in the top half, because the points differential between 9 and 14 or 9 and 16 is probably 5 points. They could go to the final day of the season and there could be 6 teams trying to get in that first half. The places are quite big, but the difference between, say, an Everton and Aston Villa in the betting to finish the top half will be vast. But really, when you look at their league positioning, there's not going to be much between them. So I think that's a little bit of value. The only problem is as well for punters, and anti-post betting isn't become so great anymore, is because that people have to tie their money up for so long. You know, anti-post betting has now been something that years ago it was very, very popular because everyone had credit accounts. So you could ring up everyone now. You could lay out $3,500 and get a call at the end of May and say, by the way, you owe some money. So everyone had anti-post bets, but now you've got to stump up the money. So, but it's different for exchanges because if you back a team, you can get in and out of markets. You can look at how they're doing at the start of the season. So we'll come on to the relegation in a minute, but I think Newcastle have got such a very difficult start to the Premier League campaign. You can take a price on them now, and if it doesn't go how you expect it to go, how we expect it to go, and they're going to struggle after 6 or 7 games, we can get out on the profit. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing now. They're trading these markets rather than keeping their positions for the entirety of the year. And that's where Matchbook comes into it and betting exchanges come into it, because that's what we can do. So I would look at markets, so I would go in and out of them. But really, I think the Premier League itself, to win it, doesn't offer any value at all. It's really, do you think Man City will win it? Do you think Liverpool will stop it? But the relegation markets, the head-to-heads, I think the top goal scorer market is a very intriguing market in the Premier League. I think especially with VAR, I think there's going to be players who are going to thrive in that condition. But I think if you're looking for the angles to play, I think to look at the points, over and under points, and maybe look at the head-to-heads between the two sides. But, you know, it's all about week in and week out. But for me, if you're going to play on the anti-post markets, trade them. Go in, get out, look at the 3 fixtures, look at the 4 fixtures coming up. If they go pointless, take and have a free bet going on to the week out and withdraw your money up.
And Mark, I wanted to ask you about the Asian handicaps. Do you bet on Asian handicaps? And if you do, why do you feel like they are, you know, a good betting market for punters?
Yeah, I certainly do. It's one of my markets of choice, really. That and the total goals line, which I'd kind of put alongside the Asian handicaps, really. I am quite a conservative punter. I think we've learned that on the Matchbook podcast quite regularly. But I just think that they allow you to have a bit more protection. You know, they're used by professionals and syndicates for a reason. There's more value there. There's more liquidity. There's margin in them as well. I love the flexibility they allow you as well, you know, compared to the traditional 1x2 market, which can be very black and white. Here we've got a bit more wriggle room. You know, back a team with a quarter goal start, a half goal start. You know, even if game ends in a draw, we're still getting a little bit back. We're still also sort of only losing probably half or quarter of our stake sometimes. So, you know, things like that really appeal to me. You know, quite a few of the major European leagues, you know, even the Premier League these days are becoming quite uncompetitive from top to bottom. So if you're a handicap bettor, Asian handicaps and Asian lines are certainly the way to go, because they really can sort of, you know, maximise your own potential for each bet.
They are the way to go for the big favourites, as Mark sort of touched on there. When you've got Man City at home and Liverpool at home, Tottenham at home now, or even Man United, Chelsea, you know, certain teams don't win by many. Man United under Jose Mourinho never really won 3 or 4-0 against a side, but they'd be priced up 5 or 6 on. So the way would always be to back the other team plus 2 goals or 1.5 goals. So it's really to sort of, for people, I mean, you know, we talk about American football, you know, handicapping is what's been going on, handicap's been going on for ages. But now, when the gulf is so big between the top half and the bottom half, Asian handicap betting is the only way to get people start really getting an interest in the game, because you're not going to, a guy in the street's not going to go down and have a bet on Man City to win at home to Burnley at 1.07. But on the Asian handicap, he might want to back Burnley plus 2 goals or Man City plus 2 goals. And I think it's amazing that, I mean, I set Victor Chandler up to move to Victor Chandler, and we moved out there in 1997. And we were the first bookmakers to do Asian handicaps in the Far East. And you think now how almost 30 odd, I can't do my maths. So that's 22 years on. Asian handicap hasn't really touched the potential. It's been good for big punters. It's good for syndicates like Martin. But the average guy on the street still hasn't got it. But really, it's much more interesting. If you're having a bet on a Sunday afternoon and the live game on Sky is Liverpool against Crystal Palace, well, you're betting, unless you pick a goal scorer and you pick a correct score, it's pretty much over. The Asian handicap offers you something and a decent return. You're getting 10 to 11, you get an even money. And that's where it really comes into its own, when you've got one-sided favourites against each other.
We're going to come to you now, Matt. We're going to ask you some advice as well. We're looking for the best advice you can give someone who's looking to win more betting on the Premier League. And just picking up on something you mentioned earlier, expected points hints to me that a bit like Mark and a bit less like Nigel, you're a fan of being quite heavy on the data side of things. Is that something that you use with your own punting?
Yeah, I think it's always good to get a resource like that because, I mean, it's imperfect. If it was absolutely perfect, then we'd all be even money, and only the bookmakers would ever make any cash. But I think it's a good resource to have an idea about what's going right and what's going wrong for some teams more than the league table. The league table does in fact lie. I don't think that we can necessarily tell how well a manager is performing on the basis of a league table. It's a unipolar, unitary metric for how teams are performing. I think if you've got the look of an expected goals, expected points resource, then you're able then to see who's bucking trends and what if there is a reversion to the mean, a reversion to the norm, then you may find some value. And so I think that's always something to take a look at. Best advice, well, if you're going to win more, lose less. Boxers say don't get hit. So I think that's a good bit of advice. The biggest bit of advice is don't bet when drunk. Because I think a lot of us might be tempted to some through beer goggles, and she looks really pretty, but actually there's it's the beer talking. So I've lost money like that. Fortunately, I don't drink anymore. Not because I had a problem, by the way, I hasten to add, but it's just something that I think is unwise. So try and make sure, like a boxer, you don't get hit.
Yeah, what about you, Mark? Any advice that you can share in terms of your own processes, of something that's helped you to get better at betting on the Premier League?
Yeah, I mean, the data side is obviously the big key. We can't see every team play every match every week. It's impossible. There's no time in the world to do all that. So I guess it's be confident in your own judgment, but do your homework as well. So bet early always helps. You're always beating the line. If you're pretty shrewd, you might even move the line. But team use, schedule, coaching styles, approach, formation, all elements to consider. But from the data side of things, as Matt says there, football's a low-scoring sport. Luck plays a part. The table lies. Would you be backing a team that's won 1-0 10 times consecutively again if you didn't know that they'd been outshot in all those 10 games? Probably not. So surround yourself with as much knowledge as you can. There's a few decent free resources out there. Info goal for expected goals and expected points. Understat, who scored for just shot maps as well. If expected goals isn't appealing and expected points puts you off, just look at shots, because 75 to 80% of all goals come from shots inside the penalty area. So, there's already a little starting point that you might not have had before. So it's all about kind of rating teams based on their data, really. So if you can surround yourself with as much knowledge, it's always going to help in the long run.
Nigel Seeley, what can you add to this? What's your best advice to the listeners looking to win more from betting?
Well, I think the people who are going to be watching this and listening to this will probably be your sort of recreational punters more of your high professional punters, and I think they're very different. I think the one thing you've got to do with all punting is to completely take sentiment out of it. We spoke off air about certain football teams who have their passions for their side. Look at the bigger picture. Look at what it's all about. Take every sentiment out of anything in betting. Doesn't matter if it's rugby, football, golf, tennis, anything you've got sentiment. Bet with your head rather than your heart. That's the biggest thing you can possibly say. I always say look for unpredictable things. Look outside the box. Okay, yeah, some team can win 3-0, but what happens if this scenario happens? What happens if this happens? Things change football matches. Sending offs change football matches. Look at things that happen. Betting in running is, for me, the most crucial thing. If you're watching games after 60 minutes, what your opinion of a match and what you're seeing after. And now with the likes of with Matchbook, you can bet all the way through to the 90th minute. So I do a lot of my bets in matches. And the other thing is, my dad was a bookmaker. My dad was the racing director for Ladbrook. So my dad said to me one word thing, and it's the best advice he ever said to me. He said, "Be a judge of judges," and that's the most true words that anyone has ever said. There's so many people out there who talk a good game. There's so many people who make money at this game. There's so many people who are I'm brilliant. There's so much good information on Twitter. Mark is one of the best followers in football. If you follow Mark, your stats, and yourself, Ali, your podcast you do, the other podcasts you do, get the information, get the right people around you, listen to the right people. listen to this podcast week in and week out. You won't go far wrong. If you looked at our bets last season, be a judge of judges, because sometimes people who are gamblers, people who think they know everything. Well, I've been in this business for 30 odd years. You learn something every single day. So be a judge of judges and take sentiment out of it. It's the best advice I would say.
Spot on. I'm sure next week, before the season kicks off, we're going to get into more of the teams that we want to get with and teams that we want to get against. Just the last question before I ask you who wins the Premier League is about teams that you're looking to oppose early and often this year. Matt, starting with you, who's the team that at this stage you're just really not having?
Yeah, I think it's Brighton, to be perfectly honest. I do think they underperformed under Chris Hughes last year, but I also think that they are potentially pretty dodgy. They've got a new manager who I do think is actually very, very good, Graham Potter, but it's his first year in Premier League management. It's been a bit of a meteoric rise. I think he does really interesting things as a manager. He creates an unbelievable dressing room culture. He gets the players being very humble. He makes them realise that they're a community club. And I think that both Swansea and Brighton, he's been a really good fit for in this country. But then I look at the team sheet and I don't see any natural goal scorer. You know, Glenn Murray's yet another year older. Their first 4 or 5 fixtures are Watford away, West Ham at home, Southampton at home, Man City away and Burnley at home. I think they're all losable, actually. You know, particularly the fourth of those, Man City away is there's no points coming out of that. Southampton's a local derby. We've already talked up West Ham's capacities. I think Sebastian Haller is a really, really interesting signing. And Burnley are a side who, if they hit their straps, will start well. So if they've only got 1 or 2 points from that lot, I think they're really, really going to find things difficult from the rest of the season. They've brought in Leandro Trossard, who is another left winger, yet another winger in that team, from Henk, coming from the Belgian League. That's £18 million of the budget spent. They brought in a League One centre-half from Portsmouth, Matt Clark. And that's it. They haven't brought in anyone yet to score the goals. There's only a week to go, so whoever it is isn't going to be getting a proper pre-season. And they're 9-5 or 15-8. They're almost 2-1 to go down. So although Nigel made a very good point about not tying up your capital for 38 games in the season, I think that if the rest of the market is going alongside those kinds of indexes at the moment, we're talking about them being, you know, double your money about going down. So it looks like the market thinks that they're going to be fairly safe. Well, I think that there could be money to be made there, personally.
Nigel, who are you going to be getting against early on?
I think it's in the relegation market. I've got to be against Newcastle and Crystal Palace. They're my 2 teams I really want to oppose. I agree. I think Brighton will struggle as well, but I think they'll just have enough about them. I think we're all of the same opinion that the 3 teams being relegated will have good seasons, i.e. finish 4th from bottom. That's a good season for them. But I think Newcastle was the interesting one. I think Steve Bruce was a typical Mike Ashley appointment. He didn't uninspiring. They're a club that are just on tinkering on absolutely a car crash to happen. You know what's going on up there. How much was Rafa Benitez worth to that side? How many points was he worth to that side? You know, you're going from Rafa Benitez, a Champions League winning manager, to Steve Bruce. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, really. And then you look at the start they've got. They're 9 games into the first 9 games of the season. Liverpool, Tottenham, Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Leicester away. If they get off to a terrible start, which I think they will do, then I think it will just be something to just sit back and watch. And I think now we'll get on them now 3-1 to get relegated, 11-4, something like that. I think they were 3-7-2 earlier in the week. But I think if they get the points expectation what we think they will do, I think there'll be and everyone will be Ashley out to podium. There'll be people demonstrating. They'll be down to 6-4 by Christmas, and then we'll get out and get the money and buy the kids Christmas presents with it.
They're not going to go down though. They've got a pretty.
Well, no, that's the point. That's what I'm not worried if they go down or not. I want to get their money, get out, and do a runner.
Yeah, I do think that there is a massive narrative about how bad Newcastle are, even from within their own fan base. And I think they are. I mean, my view is, at the start of last season, even with Rafa Benitez, they started dreadfully. You know, I don't think that he was that big a deal for them. I think if you look at the spine of that side, you've got Dubravka in goal. He's pretty good. I think Fabian Schär could step into pretty much any defence in the Premier League, actually. I think I'd have him ahead of John Stones at Manchester City in England. I think that the John Joe Selvey is as good a playmaker as any on his day. I know it's very inconsistent. They brought in Almiron, who looks really good. Joe Linton was excellent for Hoffenheim. I think the spine of that team certainly is a long way away from relegation, though. Nigel, I do take your point. I think that the narrative is wrong about
look who's
how
driving.
bad they are.
The thing is, look who's driving the bus. I'd rather Butler from on the buses than Steve Bruce, to be honest with you. Showing my age there, but you have all them players, but you've got Steve Bruce running the show. And I think you said about Chris Wilder. I think the manager's just as important as the players you've got. And he's 5-6 years past that job.
Mark,
yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Where do you stand here, Mark?
Well, in the Newcastle debate, well, I think the value's probably gone on Newcastle for relegation. They were 6-1 the week after Middington's left. It's half the price now. Agree with everything Nigel was saying, really. I think there's turmoil around that club. The horrible start to the season could easily get worse. So, but I think I'll sort of be leaving it for now. I think Chelsea are probably an interesting one in the early start of the season, as Nigel mentioned earlier on in the recording. Eden Hazard, 31 goal involvements to sort of replace there with a transfer embargo and Frank Lampard coming in. But looking at a team to oppose earlier in the season, I'm not going to say they're going to lose 3-4 games or anything drastic like that, but I'd be looking towards the handicap to oppose Liverpool here at the start of the season. It's easy to forget that they finished their season in June, which is obviously much, much later than any of their rivals. Their front three were all away at summer tournaments. Salah and Mane at the African Nations both ended in sort of the 6th of July or the 19th of July. Also coming off a World Cup year as well, so almost a full year of football really for club and country. Then you've got Alisson, Firmino and Fabinho, who are away with Brazil at the Copa. They won that competition. It didn't end until the 7th of July. So there you've got 6 of their potential starting 11 finishing the season in the first week of July, when many other teams will be getting pre-season. You just need to look at their pre-season results and performances. The last 4, lost 3-0 to Napoli, drew 2-2 at Sporting, lost 2-1 to Sevilla, lost 3-2 to Dortmund. They play Lyon on Wednesday night. Obviously have the Community Shield to come to hopefully iron things out, but I've already seen Klopp's been asked questions about conditioning, preparation for the new season. He's already coming under a little bit of pressure. So, I'm just a bit sceptical over the conditioning of some of those leading players in the early parts of the season. And also towards the latter end of the season too. They play 5 Big Six teams in their first 12 games as well. So there's definitely potential there for Liverpool to be playing catch-up early on.
Perfect. Well, I've got everything I needed to get from this Premier League preview panel with Mark O'Haire, Nigel Seeley and Matt Scott joining me. A lot of good betting advice, but also some early thoughts. Well, not that early. We've got just over a week to go. Some thoughts on most, I would say, of the Premier League teams heading into the new season. I've just got one more thing to ask from you. We're just going to go round the room, shall we say, here, starting with Matt and then to Mark and finishing off with Nigel. All I want from you at this stage, as we record with just over a week to go until we start the season, is your Premier League winner, starting with you, Matt.
No, Manchester City.
Mark?
Manchester City.
Nigel?
Manchester City.
It's a full house from us on the Matchbook betting or Matchbook football betting podcast. We'll be back to preview the opening weekend of the Premier League season next week. And you can find us, as mentioned at the top of the show, on all podcast platforms, but also now in video form. Whether that's good or not is up for you to decide. But we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, on Periscope, anything that you can find. So thank you so much, gents, for joining me. You've piqued my interest, piqued my excitement ahead of the new season. And
Piqued early.
We will be back again this time next week. Thanks for listening.